Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M, Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, Wiam Nemu. And in honor of Arab American Heritage Month, we have today with us David Serio, who is a curator of education at the Arab American National Museum. Welcome, David.
Hi, Wiam. Nice to see you.
As an educator and public programmer, he conducts educational presentations and workshops, both in person and online. Mr. Serio has also helped in the planning and implementation of youth programs and cultural events, such as the SURA Arts Academy, a youth photography program, which I love to hear about that once we start this interview. So I have so many questions for you because of this. We have such a large Arab American community in the United States in general, but particularly in Michigan. So I want you to, you're the expert in this area, so I want you to share with us the history of Arab Americans. When and why did they start migrating to the United States, and what's their population today, and just all these little fun facts.
Sure. No, so thanks again for having me, Wiam. It's really great to connect with you, and thanks again for bringing the Arab American National Museum as a part of this really important conversation, and thank you for all the work that you guys are doing on this. So just to introduce the museum a little bit and then kind of get into like why we focus on what we focus on. So the Arab American National Museum is the first and only museum of its kind in the entire country that's dedicated to telling the history, culture, and contributions of Arab Americans and sharing that with the world, really. We see ourselves as more of like a cultural touchstone. So because we mean a lot of different things to different people are able to come into our institution, read our exhibits, look at our stuff online, and take what they will, because we mean so many different things to so many different folks. Just a little bit more about the museum itself. So we are a Smithsonian affiliated institution. So we work with the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. We're also accredited by the American Alliance of Museums. So in the museum world, that's a really amazing and impressive thing to have under your belt. Basically, everything that we do, our collections, our archives, and everything that we do is at an A++ kind of standard, if you will. We are also an affiliate of Access, which has been doing great work with social services in the community for over 50 years. And the museum itself actually opened its doors May 5th, 2005. So we're just coming up in the year 2022 on our 17-year anniversary. And so one of the missions of the museum is to tell the Arab American story, and that has a lot to do with the question that you're asking about immigration, right? So like everybody, kind of who is here, what are the numbers, all these great questions that you would ask. To start broadly, and then I guess kind of shrink in towards Michigan. So numbers are really hard to get, and we can talk a little bit more about that if there's interest, but numbers are really hard to get. In short, it's because there's not a box on the census, so it's really hard to capture like hardcore numbers and data on the community. But great organizations like the Arab American Institute do a lot of this population. And so there's an estimated 3.7 million Arab Americans in the entire United States. And folks really came, at our museum, we focus on 4 distinct time periods of Arab immigration. And the earliest major time period is really the 1880s until the 1920s is kind of that first time period. And so that's when you see the first large bulk of Arab immigrants coming to the U.S. And it's mostly for education and mostly for economics. We get a lot of questions on our tour about, why did this group come and why did that group come and why did they settle here and there? And most of the time it revolves around economics, whether it's jobs, being able to feed your family, things like that. And so economics really drives everything. So that was a major driving force behind the communities coming to the U.S. And then that story goes also into Michigan as well. So a lot of people are confused why so many Arab folks will come to Michigan, especially when it's pretty cold. Sometimes it's really cold in April and May.
Right. The weather is not the most pleasant, especially if you're coming from the Middle East.
Exactly.
And the Chaldeans, they came, one of the tours I gave yesterday, but I mean, it's known that the Chaldeans came here because after the first person went to Philadelphia and realized that there was no Arab community there, then he went back to Iraq. And then they did a little bit more research, and then they realized that there was a Lebanese and Syrian community that was established here. So
Okay.
that was the reason that they came here, and the Lebanese had a very big influence, and they were very helpful for the Chaldean community until they got on
Interesting.
their feet.
Interesting.
Yes.
And that's exactly why our organizations exist and work together and can learn from each other. I did not know that. That's really interesting.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's an important part of our history because there were no Chaldeans in Michigan, but that was the reason they chose, because there was a similarity in the Arabic language.
Mm.
And then also for the Christian Lebanese, there was already a church, and it was mostly the language. And so when they came here, and the Lebanese that did have certain businesses that we ended up learning from, including the store business,
Mm.
was from the Lebanese.
Interesting. As a Lebanese person, that makes me feel even better. No, that's really interesting. I did not know that.
And I visited, the museum several times. I was surprised by the structure of it, because I kept finding that there was like additional floors, including like at the what do you have? You have like a little theater area at the
We
correct?
do. Yeah, we have a
Yes,
theater space. Mhm.
yes, and I had shown we did some kind of an event for a documentary that I was doing, and then the first floor where you have events, and it was later through a different visit that I found that there was another floor,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Right. And then so I kept thinking like, oh, there's so much here to discover. It's not, it could go for a couple of visits, especially if you care about history, culture, really understanding the Arab community, not only in America, but just in general, because there's so much interesting things that have happened in the Middle East. It's not just about, their life over here. So yeah, so it's fairly large. Did you guys expand it over time, or was it originally built the way it is today?
It's a good question. So originally it was built as the museum is today, but we've added different additions. So yeah, initially the museum started off with 4 floors technically. There's the lower level where our auditorium and our theater is. There's our main level, which is our courtyard space, which is fashioned in a way where we want to welcome guests. Courtyards oftentimes overseas in the Arab countries is a way to people to gather and have conversation and things like that. And so we wanted to make our first floor very welcoming. And the first floor also is a little bit more historical. So it talks about the history of the Arab world. So it's kind of pre-Arab American, if you will. So it talks about the rich contributions that you'll find from the Arab world. So the invention of algebra and the astrolabe and music and science and religion and art and different things like that. And then, yeah, the second level, technically the third level, I suppose, is our not permanent, it's our core gallery spaces. So we have, like you were mentioning, like there's history, culture, famous Arab Americans, a map of the Arab world, right? So if you're going to talk about the Arab American community, what areas are we talking about? We also talk a lot about identity there. And then the highest floor is our offices, which is not that interesting. But we did build an addition.
I even got to see that part, and that's what
Oh,
I
you
mean. Like over the years, each time I visit, I end up finding something new. But another thing that I was really impressed with is the library. You have a very nice library. I don't know if there's been a lot of changes since COVID and all that, but I believe that it still exists and it's the same, correct? Or you still have a library at the museum?
We do, very much so. Yeah. So we have a library at the museum that is one of the biggest collections, in my opinion, at least one of the biggest collections on Arab American literature of most institutions. I mean, other institutions may have literature on Arab Americans, of course, but that's like our specialty, right? So we have like literature on a variety of topics that connect with the Arab community. And then in addition to that, we have several temporary gallery spaces in the museum. So we're currently housing 2 exhibits by Yemeni American women, which is really awesome. One is like nostalgic and the other is like Yemeni futurism. And it's really, and they play really well together. And then the last space we have is our annex space, which is kind of the addition that we built. So the museum itself has been around since 2005. The annex was something that was christened and built, I think, I forgot exactly, a few years after the museum's opening. And that's kind of like a big industrial space where people can have events, and it's very flexible. We have art exhibits in there sometimes, but it's more so for the community.
Oh, and I did not know the story of that area. I've been to that area as well because you had Heather Raffo come and do her play before, and
Yes.
you've had meetings, the Knight Foundation, and I've been there. So I was not aware. I just thought it was a space that allowed you guys to utilize, rather than that actually belonged to the museum. Oh, I think. Oh, it froze a little bit. He'll be back. It was such a fun conversation. So let's just wait until Dave comes back. But really, for anybody who has not been to the Arab American National Museum, it's um, so worth visiting there. And it's in Dearborn. It's not just that the museum itself is so great, but even the area, the Dearborn, when you go, like right now, when I'm planning my next visit, I'm waiting for, oh, there's Dave again. You froze for a little bit. And I was telling people how great
Sorry.
the museum is, and how the area that you've chosen, where it was built appropriately in Dearborn, that area is wonderful as well. So when we were talking a few minutes before the interviews, and I said about our plan to visit, because there's no way we're going to come to Dearborn and just visit the museum. Sorry, but like there has to be a restaurant associated. It has to be a whole trip, right? Where you're going to go visit. You're going to go have lunch somewhere in one of the many wonderful restaurants. You're going to take a walk. You're going to have shatila for dessert. And then you're going to, probably shop, because like it's just the produce market. So it's a nice little trip to go. So the whole essence is, is this why that area was chosen to build the museum? And how long did it take to build the museum?
Yeah. So those are great questions. So that's pretty much the main reason why the museum was established, is because of the large concentration of Arab Americans. So Dearborn and Metro Detroit in general is home to the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the entire country, and of course, specifically Dearborn is known as kind of like the capital of Arab America, if you will. I don't know if everybody else gives up that title, but a lot of folks, like, this is the heart of the Arab American community, is the Dearborn area, and so that's one of the reasons the museum was established, is because we're a very community-based space. So a lot of the things in our exhibits are donated from the larger Arab American community. So our objects on display, our oral histories that play in the exhibits and in our collections, our digital scrapbooks, everything is contributed by the Arab American community. And so what better place to exist than to exist within the community? And so that's really why the museum was purposely built there. And it did take a bit of time to build the museum, and the whole process started, like, just the concept of the museum was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was conversations amongst community folks that said, you know what, there's no space in our in the community, right, near or far, that is able to tell the story in a museum, way to kind of collect these objects, these stories, and to help educate the public on our community, tell our story accurately and fully, and then also be a space for young Arab Americans and Arab Americans really of all different demographics to be engaged in and inspired by what the museum does. So this museum is really a space for and by the Arab American community and for Arabic speaking folks, because we do know that people may not identify as Arab, but may be connected like we am, like you were saying, through language. And so we're a place for folks that come from those 22 different countries, not just like Arab identifying, but folks that can connect linguistically, culturally, and other ways.
Yes, and there are a lot more that we're connected by, aside from the language. So the food, of course, the food, and also the music. We know that our love for the music and the dancing, the similarities, the depkas. Just a different version. Just like there's in the Arab world, there's different dialects of Arabic. There's different versions of our dances, a little bit different versions of our dolma. The great cleaves and things like that. But yeah, I really did enjoy it. And we also are appreciative that, so since I started at the Chaldean Cultural Center, I was informed that the Arab American National Museum has been very helpful in giving advice for us, because we are newer. Our museum opened in 2017, and so hearing the how helpful you guys were, we've reached out, Sans, or I have, and you've also been very helpful. So I feel like it's like a little, really, it is an that sense that we feel, that the ties that we feel that were from the Middle East, that we can continue here on a different and more peaceful level. So it's full of rich history, but there's also an open-mindedness to include everybody. And I found out today, this is the first time, because I was always curious about your last name. And when we connected, I said, your last name like sounds so Spanish. And you said, it's actually Italian. I said, oh, it's making sense now, you know. I love that you have that. So you're Lebanese and Italian,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You totally bring all of the cultures in, and that's beautiful. You bring the West and the East together. I think this is probably very, very important, being that you are an educator. That there's something. How did you feel growing up? Because my question, without knowing that particular background, I was going to ask you, what is your experience as an Arab American? But given that you have these different backgrounds, did that make a difference? I don't know. I don't know how it feels like to have different backgrounds. I was born in Baghdad. I came at age 10, and I was, as an Iraqi American, that was my experience. But I wonder what it is if I would have had a Western element to me, or my background as well.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I know, so there's different things I think that like people like look at when they're looking at individuals, right? And I know like my name, is very I guess Western, if you will. I mean, I'm sure there's Daves, there's Dawoods over in the Arab countries, but for the most part, when you hear my name, nobody bats an eyelash. You're like, oh, okay, there's Dave Serio, whatever, he might be a European of some sort or whatever. But the look sometimes, or the clothing, the cultural clothing that I wear sometimes, like especially growing up, there were, I guess the best way, like there were just question marks, like, oh, this is interesting, like what, you don't maybe look like other Italians, or I don't know, whatever folks were thinking at the time, or maybe that clothing is very different. I've seen it in certain areas, but like sometimes clothing, if you see it in like films and things like that, it can bring up like maybe stereotypical images, or maybe not the best image of that culture, again, through the lens of like the media specifically. And so growing up as an Arab American, I had to constantly kind of explain, first off, where Lebanon was. I remember having numerous conversations with folks, and nobody had any idea what or where Lebanon was. And so I would have to like explain to them what I was. So it got very exhausting to have to like explain what being Lebanese was. Like everybody knew Italian, but nobody knew what Lebanese was or what that meant. And so it was just a lot of explaining. And then after 9/11, there was more of a magnifying glass on me, because people knew I was Lebanese at that point, but they again, based on what they saw in the media, in TV, and in films, there was a lot of negative stereotypes. And so people didn't connect with anything else with that besides like that element of like terrorism or hatred or whatever the case is. And so as a third generation Arab American, that kind of really forced me to want to understand a little bit more about my culture. So like, I know like you're saying that people come from like the Arab world, like Iraq, for example, come here, and there's kind of a blending of the two sometimes of American and Arab culture, versus myself that was third generation. And I didn't quite understand what it meant to be Lebanese. I thought I did. But then like, when you're kind of getting all these labels thrown at you, I was like, what exactly does that mean to be Lebanese, to be Arab American? And so I went through this, it's a long story, but I went through this like whole journey and like talked to my grandparents about what that meant. And I was kind of able to have a deeper understanding of what that meant. And that really led me to the museum to like educate myself, but then use that as a way to educate other people about the Arab community, fight against stereotypes, and really just to showcase the rich history that comes from this part of the world.
Oh, I like that you took on this job, because I was going to ask you how you get involved, but there is that deep interest. Really, the best way to be thrown into it in order to understand it, because I'm sure every day you learn something new. Even me telling you about the Chaldeans when they came, and how the reason that they came, being that there was a Lebanese community here. And what I didn't know is when you said people didn't know where Lebanon was, and I was under the impression, because that was the case about Iraq until the 2003 war, that I was like, okay, nobody knows where Iraq is, and they always mix it up. I'll tell them the first time, and then the next time oh, is it Iran? And I realized like there was so much confusion, even though there wasn't originally a war in 1991. well,
Mhm.
the invasion and then the sanctions, but still people didn't know.
Right.
And then they didn't know that Mesopotamia had anything to do with Iraq. And
Mhm.
so I kind of felt like a sense of responsibility as a writer. For we have different, you're an educator, so you felt that way about from that sense. But for me as a writer, I felt there was a sense of responsibility to at least learn, to at least communicate this with them, or to use tools, my artistic tools, in order to communicate that. But I thought it was more for the Iraqi culture. I didn't know, or the country of Iraq. I didn't know that it was the case for Lebanon as well. It seemed like Lebanon is more like known, but I I think after 9/11, there was a lot of people that at that point felt like there was more of a responsibility, that we can't rely on others to share our stories, that we have to show who we are, because we're not the people that did what was done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for better or for worse, right? Like, we've had a lot of conversations, especially now that we're 20 years away from 9/11, and there's conversations that are definitely changing. This idea of like, we don't need to have to explain ourselves. People should be able to use their critical thinking skills to know that this is not the reflection of the community. But you're right. At the time, it was like, let me try damage control almost. Like, let me, talk about my culture and all the beautiful things and things like that. And so I think there's definitely been a shift of like trying to educate people, but educating them nowadays in like a different way, is like not being apologetic per se. Because again, no other, very few other communities have to constantly apologize for something horrific that happened. Some should, some, whatever. But like, we're trying to move away, I think, from like, being apologetic about, this is not representative of us. We know that at this point, right? And so now we're able to educate people in a different way by, like you said, like exposing the culture, exposing the language, taking people to restaurants, exposing them to the different types of foods that exist, showing them, educational resources like the map of the Arab world that we have in our museum, so that people can kind of do their, get the general understanding, but then also do a little bit of their own work and explore Dearborn on their own to get more knowledge on their own. So that's kind of our goal, is to like help educate people, but then also for them to kind of take those tools and apply it in their life, or spread the knowledge to other folks or whatever.
Yeah, and also at the end of the day, we, even if we're called Arab Americans, Iraqi American, Lebanese American, but we're still individuals and not necessarily fall into one group. Because I don't know, not most Chaldeans are like, I wouldn't say are like me. Most Chaldeans, there might be like on the surface, I could look like everybody else and cook the same foods, or live a lifestyle, but my thoughts are different, my passions are different, and having focusing on art and culture allows for people to honor themselves individually. Even though they have that background, they don't have to feel like they're have to be grouped
Right.
and defined as a group. I think you being of diverse background also creates a nice, you make people wonder, you make people
Mm.
question, you make people, and then their minds can kind of work and step outside of the box. So having that background is just an extra blessing, in my opinion. And you know what is something that you're involved in now, that we're talking about an individual level and being able to express yourself individually and using art especially to do so? um, you've participated in the Arab Film Fest collab
Mm-hmm.
collab or something. What is that about? I'd like to learn more about that, and for our audience as well.
Sure. Yeah. So the Arab Film Fest collab is currently going on at this moment as we speak. And so one of the things that we wanted to do during COVID, as many of us were like locked down, or the museum was shut down just shy of 2 years because of COVID and other factors. And so we decided, you know what, like we still need to carry out our mission, right? We still need to educate the public on the community and be a resource and a space for Arab Americans, and again, people who are connected to those 22 countries. And we decided, you know what, what's an easy way to reach across the aisle and involve other people? It's through programming, right? And so what we did, the museum kind of helped to lead the charge. And so we reached out to 3 other organizations across the country: Arte East in New York, the Arab Film and Media Institute in California, and then MISNA, which is in Minnesota. And we got together and they said, hey, none of our institutions can do a film festival right now because of COVID. This was in 2020. And we said, what can we do as, let's get together and think of some ideas how we can take, elements that we all do really well, all organizations promote and do film programming. What can we do? And so the idea came is that, all 4 of our institutions will gather together and do an online film festival. And so that's what's existed for the last couple of years. And so currently the Film Fest Collab is running it started April 7th and it's going until April 17th. And films are accessible totally online. This year, we are bringing, since we each were able to finally have our own individual festival in 2021, what we're doing is, again, trying to work together, and we're showcasing 2 films from our respective film festivals and putting them together into this beautiful collab so that, again, if people didn't get a chance to watch it, they can watch it again. Or, if you missed our personal film festival, we're bringing it to the audiences of the 3 other organizations. And we've also brought 2 brand new films that none of our organizations have previously screened. So it's really just a way to kind of keep up with the idea of, being inclusive and bringing other organizations and becoming and fulfilling our mission as a national institution. And one of the best ways to bring, institutions and the community together is through film and public programs.
Yes, I think working together is very important, and this is how you find out about each other, and collaborating is wonderful. What other programs? We have like a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure that I'm sure all these programs or whatever the festivals, the events are all available. People can go and check out the website and they will be able to have access to all. What other programs that you currently have that people can come in and see? And I know that recently the museum did open. What's new about it, and what are you guys doing right now, and what do you plan to do in the near future?
Sure. So great questions. Great way to end also. So first, before I forget, so everybody can go to the Arab American National Museum's website at arabamericanmuseum.org. And we keep up to date on on things happening near and far. We also have like a community event section. So events that are happening in the community that maybe we're partnering on, or maybe it's just a really cool event and we're sharing with our community. Folks can also follow us on social media and see all the different things we have coming up. But in terms of programs that we have, so we have a couple of really great, exciting programs coming up in the near future. One of my favorite programs, you had mentioned like restaurants and food. So we do a Yella Eat food walking tour. And it's the idea that we'll take folks to several businesses on Michigan Avenue. We also have a Yella Eat food tour on Warren Avenue, and folks will be able to sample foods from the different restaurants. Because
I'm signing up to that, David. I'm in. Okay.
It's so good. There's one.
Well, I love walking. I walk every single day too, by the way. Like I walk for an hour outdoors. Okay. So, and I'm already feeling like the way you're describing it, I feel like back home, like when you walk and you just kind of buy things from the vendors.
And that's really what it is like we take people into the different stores. We try to give like a wide variety of food because Dearborn, as you know, has a lot of different restaurants. And so like when we do the Warren Avenue tour, for example, we'll go to a grocery store. We'll go to a couple of Lebanese restaurants. There's a Syrian restaurant. There's an Iraqi restaurant, Iraqi kebab, which is delicious. We'll do Shatila, which is a really famous sweets place. So we try to give like a nice global tasting of the Arab countries. And it's a great way to, sample new food, but also to like just walk and experience the culture of being. It's almost like I hear this so many times from people. Being in Dearborn is like being back at home because, like you said, it's, there's restaurants, there's stores, there's vendors, there's clothing stores, there's religious institutions, there's signs in Arabic all over the place. So it's just a really great way to like connect to home, or like, if you're not familiar with Arab culture, like sample some of the foods that we have, which is one of the best parts of our culture, I think.
When is that starting, Dave? This is really fascinating. I love this idea. When does it start?
So there's 2 happening in May, and then hopefully, as things kind of continue to improve COVID wise, we're hoping to bring more in August and September. But as of now, we have one for May 8th. I think 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. The information's on our website. Okay. And then we have one on Saturday, May 21st.
Okay, so that's just around the corner. That's wonderful. And is there that's what you're having? And can you just repeat? I don't know if this is still going on. With the Yemeni art exhibit, is there something going on right now where people can see that, or is that Pat?
Yes. Yeah, there's two. Again, I think I mentioned very briefly that there's two amazing exhibits done by Yemeni American women. The first is called Soft Powers by Yasmin Nasser Diaz, who's a child of Yemeni immigrants who came to the US, and is very nostalgic. So she talks about her. I don't want to give too much away, but she talks about her kind of dueling identities, right? This idea of like being an American, being Arab, and then being kind of Arab American. And she talks about code switching and kind of the balancing of all these different identities and layers and cultures. Her exhibit really references back to kind of very nostalgic growing up as an Arab American in like the 80s and the 90s. So you'll see like posters of like famous Arab musicians. And then posters of like, you know, American pop culture icons that were famous in the 80s and 90s, like Janet Jackson right next to, you know, I don't know, Feiruz or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's a really cool exhibit. And then the other exhibit we have is an exhibit by Yemeni American. She's Yemeni and Bosnian American. Her name is Alia Ali. And the exhibit is called El Felak, which in Arabic means like dawn or daybreak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this idea of, it's kind of the opposite of Yasmin's in terms of like the time zone it's displaying more Yemeni futurism. So this idea of, you know, why do we need futurism? Why do people in Yemen want futurism, right? If we think about what's going on. So this idea of like this like amazing like starship that's shooting the Yemeni population into the future, to better times, to more hopeful days. And the exhibit has, I believe, 81 different like little mini screens all across it. And it's not that this is exactly what it is, but it's in the shape of an octopus where there's tentacles coming down. It's a massive structure. It's in between the first and second levels in like that area, kind of from between the courtyard into the second level. And there's tentacles that are going like all over the place. And there's screens that focus specifically on like Yemen, like dance and women and language and art and all these different things. And you can seriously spend just hours on El Felak, on that exhibit, and not see anything else in the museum, and like just spend hours looking at that. Of course, we don't want you to do that. We want you to look at everything, but like there's so much detail. So
it's definitely deserving of more than one visit, that's what I said in the beginning. Like I don't even think that there was an exhibit, but over the years I visited so many times and I'll always find something new. Yeah. And I want to just say one last thing too. I appreciate that over time, and I've observed this with my own eyes, that you do honor women artists in many different forms. Like I said, I came and saw Heather Raffel when she did her play. And there's just been many women, some of who have been on your board that I know that participated in the process. And I know we have one of our board members right now is trying, I don't know if he passed to be a docent at your museum, but he's having fun with that. Yeah. Father Andrew?
Oh yeah. We're really excited to
have him on board member, right? So I was like, well, you don't make time to be a docent for us, but I don't know. He's more excited, to be in Dearborn. It's like almost traveling, it's like traveling somewhere else. Right. And so the whole essence of it. And so I appreciate what I have seen, even as an individual, as a woman from an Arab country, that there is the opportunity for artists to showcase their work there. I've been received very kindly with regards to having my books in the library. And this is all before me having to do anything with the Chaldean Cultural Center. This is just part of who you guys are. So that's very important for us. We are creating a different type of community, a different type of story here. And I feel the museum does treat people as individuals, regardless of their backgrounds or regardless of the backgrounds. That's how it is. And that's kind of the whole theme of America, right? Is doing that at the end of the day. So thank you so much, David. Any last words before we go?
Two small last words. I totally forgot that we also have an Iraqi American woman exhibiting her work, Zahra El-Majdi, who's from Southern Iraq. And she also is doing like repurposing, so like taking images and repurposing them into art. So there's also some really cool Iraqi artists that are being displayed in the museum as well. In our 3 of 3 galleries, we have all Arab American women, which is really amazing. But other than that, no, thank you so much, Wiam, for having me. It's really a pleasure to connect with you as always. And yeah, if folks have not been to the Arab American National Museum, I really hope you all will check us out. Also, Wiam, you're doing amazing work. Just a little bit north of us here in Dearborn, but Thank you so much, and happy Arab American Heritage Month to
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you. This was so informative and I really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do visit the museum. It's excellent, and the nearby restaurants. Okay. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.